Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Procure-to-Pay, Tiered Operating Models and Automation that Deliver Results. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Marisa Brown, Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management at APQC, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today from Scott Madden. First, we have Trey Robinson, and he is a business transformation and shared services leader, specializing in multi-function shared services design, implementation, and improvement. And Trey co-leads the supply chain practice with John Francis, our other speaker today. Trey also brings more than 25 years of consulting experience with extensive knowledge in creating and implementing shared services strategies, leading major corporate transformations, and improving profitability for client companies. He has interacted with corporate directors and officers of domestic and global companies covering many different industries. Trey is an author of numerous articles and is a frequent speaker at shared services industry conferences. Joining Trey today is John Francis. John is also a partner at Scott Madden, and he is in both the corporate and shared services, as well as the energy practices. He co-leads the supply chain practice with Trey, delivering projects across industries from logistics to energy. And John comes with more than 13 years experience at McMaster Car Supply Company, a multi-billion-dollar industrial supply firm. He was one of 13 corporate officers and was responsible for the functional areas of finance, human capital management, materials and inventory management, contact center operations, and marketing. And you can scan the QR codes on your screen to connect with our speakers. Without further ado, I will now turn it over to John.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for taking time out of your Thursdays to join us for today's webinar. We'll be covering several topics today, which you see on your screen. The first one is a little introduction to Scott Madden. Then we'll walk you through procurement service delivery concepts, including those things that make this model unique and make it very valuable for companies. Trey will take over on the third section there on the agenda and cover two topics. The first are technologies within procurement service delivery models. And then after technologies, Trey will also cover ways clients transition from thinking about the model to actually implementing the model and some of the leading practices in implementation that we've learned over the years. Finally, we'll reserve some time at the end for questions. So let's jump right into the introduction to Scott Madden. So who we are. Scott Madden is a general management consulting firm. We got our start back in 1983 as a firm that was focused on electric and gas utilities. During the 80s, these electric and gas utilities in the industry began to diversify by buying companies that were not regulated. And those acquisitions prompted them to have to set up what's called service companies, which provided back office services like finance, HR, IT, and of course, supply chain. The combination of the regulated entities and the deregulated entities created a requirement to track and manage which services were consumed by which entity so that the regulator could be aware. These service companies that were embedded in the electric and gas utilities were the forerunner of today's shared services organizations. Scott Madden provided consulting services for a number of years during the 1980s to these firms. And then we launched our own shared services practice in the early 1990s. Today, we still have those two practices, one focused on utilities, and the second is focused on corporate and shared services across all industries. On this slide, we briefly talk about our areas of focus within the corporate and shared services practice. As I mentioned on the prior slide, we've covered many industries in our corporate and shared services work, not just electric and gas utilities. On this slide, there are 6 areas we focus on in this practice, which include supply chain. Of course, we will focus on that today, but also finance and accounting, human capital management, information technology, and other business services like real estate, facilities, or communications that can benefit from a shared services model. We have over 200 consultants, and we're headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. On this slide, we summarize our supply chain practice. Our supply chain practice has a range of supply chain services within the end-to-end supply chain functions, which include on the bottom there, planning and forecasting, sourcing, operational procurement that some people still call purchasing, logistics, materials management, and we also include AP, accounts payable, as a part of the end-to-end supply chain process. Most of you probably think of AP as a finance function, and in most organizations, it does report to finance, but we include AP in the P2P procurement service delivery model work, so we can look at the end-to-end P2P process. This next slide summarizes some of our work in supply chain. There's 4 big groupings there. The top 2 are the ones that will be the feature today. So procurement service delivery, which would include strategy, assessment, business case development, designing centers of expertise, selecting service management technologies, and optimizing the overall satisfaction and customer service of procurement service delivery. On the top right there is the procure-to-pay process, which we provide services in, which includes the end-to-end process design and improvement. We also, as I mentioned, will help clients select functional technologies and implement them. We help them select and design and implement metrics, as well as implement global process owners and governance. Aside from those procurement-related practice areas, we do have a series of logistics and materials management capabilities, and the overall enterprise supply chain services across the enterprise. So with that background of who Scott Madden is, let's now switch gears from the intro of our firm and our capabilities and talk about the components of an efficient but connected procurement service delivery model. This section of our discussion will provide context for and define what exactly a procurement service delivery model is. So you will eventually see our tiered service delivery model. As you can see on this section divider in the title, our approach for procurement service delivery model is meant to achieve efficiency while remaining connected to the stakeholders like business units and vendors. Here we summarize the end-to-end supply chain and provide a little history of the evolution. We think it's important to start off with this context. And so the transformation of procurement prior to the mid-2000s, procurement groups focused on executing purchases on behalf of the business. Those procurement groups were still often decentralized or partially centralized back in the early 2000s. And their work consisted of largely administrative and transactional work, such as creating and administering purchase orders. Then around the mid to late 2000s, procurement groups began to emphasize the strategic parts of their work as a way to provide realized financial benefits, for example, by conducting 3 analyses: the analysis of the market, analysis of suppliers, analysis of their spend. Those 3 inputs into sourcing strategies, they also began aggregating demand, consolidating suppliers, improving negotiations, developing strategic supplier relationships, et cetera. However, during those years, both transactional activities and strategic activities were often performed by the same group, leading to inefficient knowledge base in procurement. Procurement service delivery model is the new model now many are moving to today. It aligns the organization to the work being performed in a manner that efficiently delivers service, while also reaping the rewards of strategic buying and providing for improved productivity efficiency and technology enablement. Technology enablement is a point that we'll discuss more later when Trey picks up. What we hear from clients, one of their ongoing challenges to make sure that they don't use technology as a silver bullet, that it actually provides the benefit. And in this case, the technology that enables procurement service delivery model is a suite of service management technologies. So this is a little bit of background of where procurement has traveled over the years. We're going to get warmed up with a polling question that we're hoping you all will participate in, which you see on the screen here. The question is, which of the following 6 options applies to your procurement function? You should see a polling question popping up onto your screens for you to select an option. First option is strategic procurement is centralized. Second option is operational procurement is centralized. Third option is AP is centralized. Then we get into some of the combinations. AP and operational procurement are centralized, but strategic procurement is not. All 3 are centralized. And then finally, none are centralized. Please select the option which applies most closely to your organization. I see the results popped up. And 38% said that all 3 groups are centralized, which is great. We would consider that closer to leading practice. Surprisingly, it says operational procurement is centralized in only 4%, but I think that's because for some, AP and operational procurement are centralized. But many of you have strategic procurement centralized. So a little surprising that for many of you, the operational area, which is commonly referred to as purchasing, is less centralized than we've seen in the past. So that's an interesting set of outcomes on that poll. Thank you for sharing. This next slide, we talk about proficiency and excellence in 3 areas of procurement. Number 1 below on the left is customer service in procurement. It's largely felt in operational procurement, or what sometimes is called purchasing. Being responsive in procurement leverages the concept that the number of procurement touches or transactions with the business unit and vendors are at its highest in operational procurement. This is the area where the business unit and vendors experience you the most day to day. So being responsive in that left area is very key in providing excellent customer service, just because the transaction volumes are high. In the middle there refers to developing impactful sourcing strategies as a goal of procurement overall. But it's also a key selling point to the business units to maintain their support for the goals of procurement. The better you do in that middle section, the more support you will maintain with the business units. Number 3 on the right is the third area. It depicts the end-to-end ownership of spend categories to drive total value to the organization in key categories. Doing this as an ongoing effort is important, but a lot of times in organizations, they stop when the contract is signed. So managing categories from end to end is a way to make sure that you get the value out of the contracts and you're working closely in the performance of suppliers. The overall point we want to get across on this slide is it really requires a balance of excellence in all three areas. Some companies focus on advancing their skills to adopt category management, and they view that as the end of the journey or the primary destination. What they risk is taking for granted the importance of customer service and responsiveness, which is felt by the business units. We would suggest a balanced approach in designing your procurement service delivery model where you consider all three areas equally and being excellent in all three areas as important. If you take those concepts now to our next polling question and apply them, polling question is, which of the following applies to your procurement function at your company? First option is executives at my company emphasize category management, strategic procurement, and operational procurement equally. Second option is executives at my company emphasize category management over the other areas. And then finally, executives at my company have plans to implement category management, but have not yet installed it. So the results are coming in, and approximately half of you selected option number one, where executives emphasize the three areas equally, which is fantastic. And then it was the remainder was split between the other two options. So this would be an improvement over what we've seen in years past, which we think is good. On this next slide, we try to answer the question, how do you know you have a problem in your procurement service delivery model? The word cloud there is meant to depict what is often going on in the heads of many of the people that are in your staff working in procurement. And some of the examples of the problems they face are around the bottom there in the blue boxes. So for example, day-to-day fighting fires always wins when you are choosing between that and strategic work. The firefighting becomes a priority. Or being excellent in purchasing or operational procurement is overlooked as a contributor to business satisfaction. And there's more emphasis on category management and sourcing. The feedback loops from AP back upstream to the areas that are causing the problems are not strong or they don't exist. So continuous improvement opportunities are missed. There is a heavy focus on cost reduction, which can diminish over time if that's your only function or only focus, which leads supply chain and procurement uncertain as to other ways they can add value. And then the final point is savings achievement is negotiated, but it's not achieved during the duration of the contract. So these are some of the signs that maybe your procurement service delivery model needs to be optimized. Our next polling question asks you which of the following applies to your P2P end-to-end process. It's about landing pages and portals, which can sometimes be an area of confusion for vendors and for business units. The fewer landing pages and portals we believe is better. And so this gets at that question. Do you have one landing page where all customers, both internal and external, are directed for service? Do you have several portals that provide different services to different groups, whether they be internal or external? or do you not have a landing page or a portal? Results are in. About a third of you do not have a landing page or a portal. And about half of you have several portals. We would suggest that leading practice would be approaching that first option, where you have one or fewer landing pages for both your internal and external users. So it might be an area of opportunity for many of you. On this slide, we continue the conversation of symptoms of problems. In our left-hand side, these are the three most frequent symptoms that we see, where roles are unclear within procurement. People feel like they don't have enough time to be strategic. Their firefighting dominates their priority list every day. Transactional roles are being asked to execute strategic work, etc. The second one is what we call activity without achievement, where the business units and your partners in the business and vendors see procurement as requiring steps that cost time, that get in the way of what they need to accomplish, and are not rooted in an understanding of the business. And then finally, uncertain service access, which is going to be a feature of our upcoming slides. When procurement gets centralized, does the business know how to access service? Oftentimes they will quote, phone a friend and call their favorite person, when there might be more efficient and more direct ways to access service. This slide is where we introduce the leading practice procurement service delivery model. One thing that we want you to notice is the lighter areas in white are tiers. So you'll see on the screen tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. These tiers are a core feature of the service delivery model. The entry point to the model is tier 0, which we call direct access, which will usually involve many of the technologies you see there. We asked you a polling question about portals, which would be one of the ways you access the service model. There's also using email, but increasingly virtual agents and chatbots are being used to some degree. Intelligent voice recognition, emerging are generative AI features within tier 0. And so having a designed and robust direct access tier is a foundation for the overall service delivery model, so that the groups on the far left can enter procurement services as long as the scope is provided and the access is simple enough for them to easily enter into the model. It also requires defined roles. So on the prior pages, we talked about the symptoms, and you can see there are a series of light bulbs on this page. At the bottom, there's defined roles, because one of the symptoms of problems is that roles are not defined. And in here, if you start in tier 0 and your business unit clients know how to enter, it becomes clearer for them and resolves 2 of the symptoms. In the middle there is what's called the procurement service center, where if items can't be resolved in tier 0 through articles and knowledge base or answering simple questions, then they will escalate to tier 1, where you might access a person or get some automated help. And as work requires advanced issue resolution, there is ways to route work to the right place within the service center. You'll see outside of the service center, there are centers of expertise. There's also corporate areas, as well as business unit support advisement and continuous improvement. And there are standard escalation paths that are built in and designed between these groups. To your question, I'm going to jump to, it says, you mentioned the importance of clearly defined roles in service delivery success. Which roles are most commonly being redefined, and are they required new skill sets in continuing evolution of P2P? Thank you for that question. I'd say that, the work is being redefined in addition to the roles. So if you just start with the work, there's a lot more work being done in tier 0. The nature of the work is also changing the roles that people are involved in doing the work. Fewer and fewer people are being thought of as purchasing agents, and more of them are being thought of as agents who can problem solve. And so on the front end, there are some roles that are changing based on the technologies that are being used and the way assistance is being offered. On the tier 3, where you have centers of expertise, those become very specialized roles, and they involve everything from supplier relationship management to supply chain risk management, et cetera. And so as those COEs get built out, those roles change. Thank you for that question. This next slide takes each of the tiers that we introduced on the prior slide and gives you an overall primer for what the service delivery model looks like, and the distribution of work and some of the activities. And so tier 0, direct access, where there's portals and inquiries that come along. Usually there's access for people to get to templates, FAQs, to create cases and tickets, and complete and route PRs, purchase requisitions, and change orders, et cetera. As well as the tier 1 or customer service part of the service center, which is a mix of customer support and transaction processing. There's also calls, emails, and cases that get handled. And some of the activities are reviewing purchase requisitions and routine operational procurement. Those first 2 tiers can be around 20 to 25% of the work. And a lot of times people are trying to execute more of the work there to improve efficiency. In tier 2, there are special services, which include resolving issues and other complex processes, things like expediting and catalog management, et cetera. And then on the right, tier 3, which is about 20 to 25% of the work, there are the COEs. So, things like category management, strategic procurement, the analyses that go into those, supplier performance management, analytics, et cetera. And so at the bottom, you can see the distribution of workload that we typically see in procurement service delivery. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Trey so that he can talk to us about technologies and implementation.
Okay, thanks, John. Hey, everybody. My name is Trey Robinson, and I'm going to be talking you through the rest of today's presentation. John talked a little bit about the procurement service delivery model and where the work sits and which tiers work resides in. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the technologies that make this model work. And so on this slide, we have our enabling technologies maturity curve. Early on, lots of times organizations will start off with siloed or point solutions. They see a problem and then they go get a technology to fix it. Maybe invoices are piling up, so they implement an e-invoicing system, or they're struggling with contract renewal, so they implement a contract repository. These tools solve immediate pain points, but they operate in silos. Procurement at this level is functional, but it's still fragmented. And then as you move up the curve a little bit, you can see that these tools begin to connect into more integrated solutions. The invoice system now talks to the ERP. The contract repository syncs with supplier onboarding. Suddenly, data isn't trapped, it flows across processes. And that's when you begin to move up the curve, because efficiency gains multiply when processes are connected, not isolated. At the top of the curve, you reach what I like to call the consumer grade experience. Employees and suppliers stop comparing the technologies to enterprise systems, and instead they start to look at the technologies as a comparison to Amazon or Uber or Instacart, apps they use every day. If I can order groceries in 2 clicks on my phone, why should it take me 30 minutes to request office equipment? So that's what moving up the maturity curve looks like. It's not about throwing technology at the problem. It's about designing for integration, usability, and adoption. The real prize is a solution that feels natural to employees and suppliers, while also boosting efficiency, productivity, and communication across the enterprise. Okay, so now let's look at how intelligent automation has evolved. This slide gives us a timeline, and it's pretty fascinating to see how much things have changed just in the last decade. In 2015, we saw the rise of robotic process automation, or RPA. These robots that could automate repetitive, rules-based tasks. The classic example here is invoice matching. Instead of a person trying to match an invoice to a purchase order to a goods receipt, a bot could do that instantly. It was fast and it was accurate and it freed up staff from administrative tasks. But these bots are fragile. If something changed in the process, if the invoice template changed or the format was updated, the bot could struggle. In the next several years, we saw the implementation of chatbots and conversational agents. And these technologies could go well beyond scripted Q&A. They could handle cognitive queries and provide personalized assistance. An employee might ask, "Where's my PO?" and then follow up with, "What does the delivery clause in the contract say?" The bot can pull from the ERP and the contract management system to provide an intelligent answer. That's a huge step from the days of checking a box with RPA. In 2019, we started to see predictive AI enter the picture. This was all about foresight. Instead of just processing transactions, this AI focused on recognizing patterns. Maybe a supplier consistently billed 5 to 10% above contract rates, or maybe certain categories spiked during certain times of year. Predictive models could surface these insights before they became a problem. Procurement wasn't just reacting anymore, now it was anticipating. And now today, as you all know, we're in the generative AI era. This is a fundamental shift. GenAI doesn't just execute tasks or recognize patterns, it creates. It can draft content, summarize meetings, model scenario, and generate negotiation talking points. That's where we are now. So if you look at this timeline from RPA in 2015, advancing through chatbots and conversational agents, predictive AI in 2019, and today, GenAI, you can see how the journey really has evolved from task automation early on to now really focused on strategic enablement. Procurement has gone from being a transactional function to a strategic hub that's powered by automation. On this slide, you can see the adoption levels that we're seeing with many of our clients. Many have embraced RPA. You can see there 65 to 75%. Chatbots and conversational agents are used with some of our clients. I would say that chatbots are much more commonly used, but some are using conversational agents. And then predictive AI has really been embedded in a lot of the tools and technologies that folks use today. So we're seeing rapid adoption there as well. Many folks are using GenAI. You can see the adoption percentages in that 20 to 35% range. But so far, we've seen it predominantly in pilot form. And some companies seem to be struggling to scale to achieve the early promises of GenAI. Of course, all of these intelligent automation tools only work if the foundation is solid. The slide makes the point clearly. Data structure and integrity is essential across all intelligent automation technologies. Think about RPA. It depends on structured rules. If invoices arrive in different formats, the bot could fail. Predictive AI, it needs clean, reliable, historic data to detect patterns. Bad data in, bad data out. And GenAI requires content-rich, trustworthy data. If your policies are buried in PDF files and they're scattered across SharePoint and they're inconsistent from region to region, GenAI will produce inconsistent or probably even incorrect responses. This is why data governance is critical. Organizations can take the time to clean up their supplier records, standardize categories, and enforce strong governance, unlock far more value from their automation investment. Without that foundation, even the technology can fail. So when we talk about adoption levels, I think the question to ask is not so much, do you have AI, but rather, do you have the data maturity to make AI useful? That's the deciding factor. Okay, so this slide should hopefully connect the dots. John reviewed the service delivery model a little bit earlier, and you should recognize the tiers here on this slide. At tier 0, we have direct access. That's where a lot of the self-service tools should exist. So you'll see chatbots, portals, conversational agents, web forms, and knowledge bases. For example, an employee could ask a chatbot, what's the reimbursement policy for a hotel in New York, and receive an immediate answer. At tiers 1 and tier 2, this is within the procurement service center. Here's where we have processing and problem resolution. We also see telephony systems exist here. So that's phone calls calling a live person. Some of our clients are actually reducing their emphasis on voice. So we might see that decline over time. But today it's still one of those technologies we see as part of the procurement service center. You can also take a look at case management, RPA, and ERP integration to handle those higher volume standardized requests and processing. If an invoice needs validation or a PO needs processing, this is the layer that manages it. And then finally, you see tier 3 centers of expertise on the right-hand side. This is where experts use predictive AI or contract management, SRM, and analytics. And this is where they begin to tell stories with spend data, advising on supplier negotiations. Procurement moves beyond transactions into true strategic partnership within these centers of expertise. But the key isn't just having the right tool in each tier. It's making sure that they work together as they flow through the process. If a chatbot at tier 0 escalates a query to tier 1 and then maybe to tier 2 beyond that, the case history, the related documents, ERP data, that should all flow seamlessly through the model. That's how you deliver a smooth, efficient process and experience for employees and suppliers alike. Okay, let's talk a little bit about GenAI. As you think about GenAI, we don't think of it as just another technology layer. We think it's fundamentally different in how it integrates and operates with technologies and processes. Unlike RPA or predictive AI, which are about executing rules or spotting pattern, as I mentioned before, GenAI creates. And across procurement service delivery tiers, we think its potential is transformative. Take tier 0 on the left-hand side, direct access. This is where chatbots and portals typically live. With GenAI, those assistants become proactive and context-aware. They don't just respond, they can even anticipate. For instance, if a goods receipt note is missing, the system can alert the employee before it becomes a problem. This is no longer a static self-service. It really evolves into some dynamic engagement with both suppliers and employees. As a result, we see significant human effort being reduced over the next 5 years. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide, we're predicting even as much as 50 to 80% reduction in work around tier 0 and tier 1. As you move up into the service center, you see where transaction processing and problem solving happen. Here's where GenAI functions more like a knowledge concierge. Imagine a procurement agent facing a tricky query about travel policy in a specific country. Instead of having to dig through knowledge-based articles or multiple policies, GenAI can provide that answer seamlessly and provide it immediately. The effect, we believe, is faster resolution, reduced training time in the procurement service center, and far greater consistency. We believe that GenAI can reduce human effort in the procurement service center by 20 to 40%. And then you come to tier 3, centers of expertise. Here, the impact isn't quite as much, but it's also significant. Procurement experts here are focused on strategy, and so they're focused on category management and supplier negotiations. GenAI will arm them with richer insights and save them a ton of hours when it comes to preparation. Here, human involvement remains critical. There's still a lot of judgment in how to apply these things that GenAI can't support yet, but it can assist with synthesizing data and preparing some initial recommendations. So across every tier, the effect of GenAI is not just efficiency, it's actually augmenting how we do things today. It allows procurement to do more, faster, with better insights. But of course, as you all know, GenAI does have its risks. It can produce errors. There can be hallucinations that provide incorrect information, especially if it's not guided by strong data and governance. Organizations that succeed will be those that we think will embrace the tool, but also do it with a deliberate sense of discipline, making sure they adopt GenAI where it makes sense, but also building the oversight to ensure accuracy and trust of the information that come out of it. All right, a few use cases of GenAI, where we see GenAI being used in the procurement or procure-to-pay process. I say first here that a few of our clients really have embraced this and have implemented GenAI, but it's still largely at pilot stage, as I mentioned before. We've seen very few implemented at scale so far, but just looking at these individual use cases, I think you'll see that the potential is transformative. If you start at tier 0 in the top left, GenAI can provide suppliers and internal teams direct access to the information that they desire. Leveraging a GenAI-powered assistant, context-aware responses can be provided. For example, when a supplier calls asking about payment status, they can provide that answer immediately and accurately. If you move up into tiers 1 and tiers 2, on the right-hand side of the page, so here now we're within the procurement service center. Let's start with the top one, purchase requisition intake and validation. In many companies, you all know this process is still pretty clunky. Employees will fill out requisition forms, they'll route it for approval, it'll be flagged for issues and returned back to the requisitioner. It's pretty clunky. And so with GenAI, the intake can happen through a centralized bot that can actually ask conversational questions. So when an employee types in, "I need laptops for a new project team," AI will validate the request against the policy and could even suggesting consolidating some purchases to achieve negotiate better pricing or achieve better pricing. It's faster for the employee and smarter for the business. As you move down into purchase order processing, AI can generate bulk POs, validate them against existing contracts, and align orders against different units. So instead of buyers creating each PO manually, AI does all that heavy lifting and ensures consistency in terms and compliance. On top of that, as we talked about it being proactive, it can send automated status updates so employees don't have to keep chasing procurement for answers. Then you've got goods and services receipt and exception handling. The use cases here we think are pretty substantial. GenAI can capture documents across multiple entities, it can analyze exceptions, and it doesn't just resolve the individual issue, but it can highlight the trend and suggest upstream improvements. Invoice processing and payment, you can see on the screen there, multi-format, multi-language invoice processing, which is a big deal for global organizations. And beyond that, it can even generate enterprise-level cash flow insights by analyzing payment trends across the organization. Moving on to tier 3 and our centers of expertise, we start with strategic sourcing and vendor management. This is where GenAI can draft or create standard RFPs and RFQs. It can summarize supplier bids. It can consolidate negotiation outcomes across units. It can build a centralized vendor intelligence hub so that the procurement team has a 360-degree view of supplier performance, risk, and innovation potential. And then finally, analytics, reporting, and continuous improvement. GenAI goes beyond static dashboards. It really focuses on how to tell the story with the spin, so how to use the data and provide it in a way that analyzes the information to make decisions. So it can compare performance across entities, it can build audit and compliance packs and other significant areas. So the thing I want you all to take away from this slide is that these cases, these use cases, they're not futuristic. They're not 5 years away. People are piloting these things in some of these processes even today. Okay, that's going to bring us to our fourth polling question. You can see here on the screen, what types of capabilities are you currently pursuing with generative AI? And so you can select more than one answer here. I'm curious what everybody's using GenAI for in your organizations today. I find that a lot of companies really are struggling to figure out how to embrace GenAI. Some clients have embraced it fully. Others don't allow their employees to use it. Some employees use their own personal GenAI applications to answer questions. And so it's really all over the board. Curious as to the level of adoption that we're seeing with this group. Okay, so it looks like analytics and insights, 46%, and content creation, that's great. Drafting RFQs, drafting policies. I think everybody's really using it for text summarization. I don't know that I've gone to a meeting recently where it's not recorded and the transcript is summarized and provided back with key points and action items. And then only a few of you are using it for configuration support and coding. We'll see that as a big opportunity down the road. And then augmented knowledge management, which I think is where you gain the real advantage with that tier 0 focus area. All right, let's jump to our next slide. We're now going to turn our attention to how to actually implement a lot of this technologies and delivery model that we've talked about so far. Okay, so we believe that the implementation here is really a transformation journey. You can see the 5 overarching steps that we believe is part of any sort of transformation. It has stages, as you might imagine. You begin by assessing current state, then you design what your future state should be. That's the model that you want to build and what it looks like. From there, you implement those processes, org designs, policy and process changes. You learn from them and you scale. I think that 4th area, stabilization, is often overlooked with a lot of companies, but you can expect some time once you implement for the processes and technologies to stabilize, and you can even make minor changes to the design during that stabilization period. And then finally, you'll embed those changes into your organization through continuous improvement, whether that's a dedicated team or part of everyone's roles. We think that if you do that, that will help the new changes stick, and it'll also help you improve over time. Jumping into a little bit more detail on this slide. I see the question. I'll jump to the question at the end if that's okay, and then we'll make sure we can address it and any others that come up. Providing a little bit more detail on the transformation here. We typically see it in 2 phases. The first phase around assess and design, and the second phase around implementation. In the assessment and design phase, that's where you take stock, you conduct a thorough assessment of your procure-to-pay processes, and then you design the future state model. I mentioned earlier, but it includes processes, policies, org structure, technology. This is the blueprint for what you want your procure-to-pay service delivery model to become. One of the most common pitfalls we see folks do is they want to jump straight to future state design and even to implementation, but the risk is that they begin to automate bad processes, and that can only make inefficiencies run faster than they did in the original state. In the implementation phase, that's where you bring that design to life. You select and configure your technology, you expand or establish a service center, you train staff and roll out your communication campaigns. And then finally, you pilot those changes, learn, and refine before you scale up. The timeline, what does it look like to do something like this? You can see our typical implementation timeline here. This is about 12 to 15 months. I'd say that we've done these implementations in as few as 8 months and as long as 3 years. It really depends on the scope and scale of your transformation, how many business units you have, how many geographies you have, and things of that nature. It also depends on how fast your organization can adopt change, which can contribute to the timeline. In the early months, we focus on planning and organization. That's when leadership aligns on objectives, you form your project team, and governance is set. This is where you lay the foundations, setting expectations, defining the metrics that will tell whether you're successful or not, and establishing accountability. Over the first couple of months, that's when your current state assessment kicks in. Here's where you're rolling up your sleeves and really understanding what's happening today. The goal is to surface bottlenecks, redundancies, and inconsistencies, and also to make sure you capture baseline metrics before you begin the wholesale transformation. Once the current state assessment's done, you shift gears into the future state. This is where you define that strategic roadmap. You want to think about, well, what should the model look like in a year when we're done? What should it look like in 3 years, and how does it evolve over time? What policies and processes should be standardized? What are my technology options, and how should I apply technology to the various tiers in the model? After that, the work shifts to design, build, and integration. You configure your technologies, you test those, you design your job roles, you size the organization, and then you select staff and begin training development. If you do have a shared services center or you're considering implementing one, you're also involved in facilities during this particular time in the process. Then as you approach the end of the first year, you start to turn your attention to communicating and change management and launch readiness. You've got your processes now, you want to test them end to end, roll out your training. Some of our clients actually have marketing campaigns that they create so that they can build some excitement around the new procure-to-pay service delivery model. And then finally, your initial launch occurs. And it's usually focused on a pilot or a specific geography or business unit. Next, you focus on scaling, stabilizing, and refining. What I like about this timeline is you can see a couple of things that last throughout the entire cycle. Project management is always there. Communication and change management never disappear. Training is not a single event. It continues post-launch. So this reinforces a critical message I hope you all get today. Transformation is not as much about the technology as it is about the people and the process. And that brings me to my last slide. I'll try to get through this quickly so we can leave a little bit of time for questions. Leading practices during implementation. We've touched on these a little bit, but first, involve stakeholders early and often. I think one of the big reasons that transformations fail is that they don't have that executive support. And more importantly, it's making sure your stakeholders are aligned early on and stay aligned throughout the entire transformation. Make sure your detailed accountabilities are clear by group and by role. John touched on this a little bit. We also think it's important to define responsibilities and metrics at that level so that you can measure performance and increase the effectiveness of the model. Make sure you leverage analytics before, during, and after the transition. I mentioned about baselining earlier. Make sure you understand what the metrics look like when you started, so that way you can measure change over time. And it really does provide you that transformation story when you tell it to your stakeholders. Fourth, make sure you implement well-defined tier escalation criteria. If you can't solve it at tier 0 and it's got to be escalated, you need to make sure you've tested a number of different scenarios to understand what that criteria is. Then, as I mentioned earlier, make sure that the case notes and all the information around that question escalate through the model together so you don't have to re-ask the same questions as you advance through the different tiers. Streamline and simplify your processes. I think this is kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes people will write policies for every exception you can imagine, and that only ends up confusing and bogging down the process. So as you transition to a new model, make sure that you aggressively simplify. Also think about processes from the user's perspective. And then finally, treat technology as an enabler, not a panacea. It's tempting to think that AI or RPA can fix everything, but if it's not used, your process fails. So adoption is the ultimate measure of success. We have about 5 minutes left. I'll go ahead and close my comments for now, and then maybe we can open the floor for questions. I know we had one earlier in the chat.
Thank you so much, Trey and John, both. So we'll start with the question that came in earlier. With the transformative nature of automation and AI tools, what changes are you seeing in how the value and results of procurement organizations and processes are being defined and measured?
I can take that one. I think this is an opportunity area where the updated views of value metrics is right now being thought about. They're the classic ones about the percent of OpEx and supply chain as it relates to revenues and things. Keeping that flat or even reducing it because of the automation tools is a way to measure that, but that's also traditional, not new. There's also, depending on where you're at in your tier 0, whether you have case management technologies, you can certainly see cycle times be reduced in terms of responsiveness, how long it takes to complete work. But once again, I think it's an area of opportunity for people to begin measuring and tracking.
Thanks, John. Another question came in about, have you implemented any specific GenAI functionality in invoice processing or payment processing areas?
I'll start with that one, John. We have tested use cases in invoice processing and payment. I would say that in many cases, a lot of companies already have pretty established e-invoicing platforms, or they've integrated optical character recognition, intelligent OCR, and routed it through the process. And so if a lot of those more common tools have already been implemented, we tend not to see as much advantage using GenAI in invoice and payment. If you're not using those tools at all, though, it can be a tremendous help. And so we've tested use cases. I don't know that we've implemented it at scale yet, but we're working with a lot of our clients to understand the real value of something like that. And then more importantly, as you think about the value, does it release 10% of somebody's time, 20% of somebody's time? What's the business case? It's interesting to know that it can work, but if it doesn't provide value, then it's not as helpful as you might imagine.
Right. The one use case that I can think of that speaks to the question is some are using predictive analytics in invoice processing for things like, does this customer typically deduct? Is it usually the same amount? So that the problem solving in payment processing and invoice processing can be more automated or more quickly resolved. So that's the one case that I could think of.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Trey. And I want to thank you both for sharing your insights with us today. And just let everyone remember that you do have the ability to reach out and connect with our speakers following the webinar if you have additional questions. And a few reminders for everyone: you will receive a copy of the slides and the recording within the next few days. And we ask if you could please take our webinar satisfaction survey when the webinar closes. We always use that for continuous improvement. And you're invited to visit our website to learn more about upcoming or prior webinars as well. And we also invite you to engage with APQC. We have content in our resource library, as well as we have research bundles you're able to access, and we can also do some custom curated content for anyone's needs. And then lastly, I just invite all of you to connect with APQC via social media if you don't already follow us on our channels to see what's happening and stay up to date on the latest things. So again, thank you, Trey and John and Scott Madden, for today's presentation. And thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.